I want to start with the Trump administration arguing ICE officer Jonathan Ross was acting in self-defense. You have now seen the officer's cell phone video. What is your response? Do you believe the officer was acting in self-defense?
In the immediacy following the shooting, you heard people from the Trump administration saying that the victim was a domestic terrorist. You heard that the ICE agent was acting entirely in self-defense. And here's the thing. You don't need to take my word for it. You don't need to take their word for it. Watch the video. The ICE agent was not run over, as Trump stated. You had a person that was definitively trying to just get out of there.
Don't take my word for it. Watch the video is something you say if the video has definitive proof in your favor. That's why he says, don't take my word for it, watch the video, and then continues to give his words and his framing for it.
They were trying to leave the scene. That is not a person that's trying to run an ICE agent over. You have a person that is trying to protect our city, to look out for our neighbors.
You have a person who is trying to protect our city and trying to look out for our neighbors. Those are actions with intent. Now, before the shooting had occurred, Nichole Good was videoed for minutes, hand on the horn, blocking traffic, and that's really the most people have seen at this point. And here she is dancing and honking her car horn. So as he's referring to this instance as protecting our city and looking out for our neighbors, he's redefining obstruction of law enforcement as protecting the city. So how do you think people will take that message? Because it sounds to me like it's a go-ahead to keep blocking ICE. And there's a lot of people that have romanticized ideas about being a hero.
Will you accept the results of the FBI investigation, Mayor?
You know, if it was an FBI investigation that was done jointly with an investigation from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, we could have had some trust. Look, I don't know what the results of the investigation will be. I don't know what the evidence behind the investigation will be, other than, of course, the videos that we've all seen with our own two eyes. What I will say is there is deep mistrust because so many of the things that we are hearing are not true. You know, again, obviously people can come to different conclusions and have different perspectives. But when there is debate about baseline facts, like, for instance, did the ICE agent get run over? Guys, the answer is no. It didn't happen.
Kind of like, she just dropped her kid off at school and she was trying to get home.
Let me ask you, you told ICE, quote, to get the F out of Minneapolis. We are now seeing major protests all across the country, as you well know. I know that you've seen them as well. Do you bear any responsibility as a local leader, Mayor Frey, to bring down the temperature right now?
That may sound like a somewhat tough question, but that was actually a setup for Jacob Frey's current catchphrase.
You know, to those that are offended, I'm sorry I offended their delicate ears, but as far as who inflamed the situation, I dropped an F-bomb. And they killed somebody. I think the killing somebody is the inflammatory element here, not the F-bomb, which I'm sure we've all heard before.
So this is a powerful catchphrase by Jacob Frey. I dropped an F-bomb and they killed someone. So this framing, it weighs an unfair comparison between language and lethal outcomes, and it appeals to moral weight rather than legal process. But that comparison also collapses important legal distinctions. So when you frame it this way, you erase the distinction between protest and obstruction, which has real downstream consequences.
Well, let me ask you, because bigger picture, before this week, Mayor, ICE had already been ramping up its presence in Minneapolis. You said your police officers would not cooperate with them, that ICE enforcement was unconstitutional. You warned before this deadly shooting, quote, somebody's going to get seriously injured. Would you go so far as saying that you would support abolishing ICE?
Well, first off, I did not say that ICE enforcement was unconstitutional. What I said is the way that they are doing it is unconstitutional. You can't come into a city and discriminate solely on the basis of are you Latino or are you Somali, and then randomly pick people up off the street after that. You can't just detain somebody because they look like they are Somali or they look like they are Latino.
Yes, you can. When law enforcement is searching for criminals, they detain people that fit the description. And keep in mind, detain does not mean arrested. Detainment is to hold someone until they can be cleared, and that's a standard process of law enforcement. If police weren't allowed to detain based on physical characteristics, they'd be too afraid of arresting most people in the off chance that they were wrong.
So, look, do I think that we should just abolish the entire entity that does immigration enforcement? No. But the way it is being utilized doesn't make sense. I'm not asking for the DOJ to be abolished. I'm not asking for the Office of Management and Budget to be abolished. I am saying that the way that these institutions are being utilized right now by the Trump administration is wrong and, to be clear, is unconstitutional.
Well, let me press you a bit, because Tom Homan, the border czar, says Minneapolis's sanctuary city policy, just for our viewers, that effectively shields undocumented immigrants from deportation, makes it harder for ICE to enforce immigration law. How do you respond to that argument that your city's stance in eliminating cooperation with ICE has made it harder for federal law enforcement to safely enforce immigration laws in your city?
Look, what our policy says is that I don't want our police officers spending time working with ICE on immigration enforcement.
That part is incredibly important because local law enforcement should be protecting both ICE from obstruction and protesters from putting themselves in harm's way. And these blue cities have had local police stand down so that protesters could get into altercations with ICE. When those altercations occur, the media always finds ways to hurt the public perception of ICE in the ways that they just cover those stories.
I want our officers focusing on safety. You know what I don't want them doing? I don't want them spending a single second hunting down a father who just dropped his kids off at daycare, is about to go work a 12-hour shift, who happened to be from Ecuador. That guy, he makes Minneapolis a better place, and I am proud to have him in our cities.
Sounds to me like that Ecuadorian guy's the type of neighbor that Nichole Good was looking out for.
So, I want our officers focusing on safety, not randomly plucking people off the street and hunting them down.
Let me ask you about the leadership in your state. Dozens of people in Minnesota have been charged and convicted with stealing millions of dollars of taxpayer money for government programs. Do you think Governor Walz did enough to stop the fraud in your state, and do you support his decision not to run for re-election?
Look, obviously, everybody could have done more to prevent fraud, and I think that's a fair point to make. You do more to prevent fraud, and you look what he's doing right now. He's setting up a whole bunch of infrastructure to do that. And by the way, look, the fraud's real. We've all got to acknowledge it. The fraud is very real. And by the way, when somebody commits fraud, and there are many that have done that, you investigate it, you charge, you prosecute, and you put the person in jail. As an individual, you put the person in jail as an individual. You do not hold an entire community, any community, accountable for the actions of individuals.
That idea goes against law enforcement application of statistics. So, yes, the individual did the crime and gets punished for it. However, if enough individuals statistically turn into a pattern, then law enforcement utilizes this information in order to enforce policing where crime is most likely to occur. If police just waited around for crime to happen and then arrested people, there wouldn't be much fear of planning or organized crime. Anyway, with Jacob Frey, I'm just hearing more of the same. It's, we won't allow our police to keep people safe as long as ICE is here, or, conflating obstruction with protest. He wants either ICE to be gone completely, or the next best thing would be more escalation in the hopes that the public turns on ICE. But as always, thanks for watching.